Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom. Giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashim Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashim Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders, great millstone, for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquathim. Listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I just wanted to read an article in regards to which country is the most disliked country according to global survey finds. So I wanted to read something here. Is this publishing is coming from the Middle East Monitor. What I'll do, I'll probably link this article in the description below, and they did basically a study. Not them, I'm sorry. It was another organization called Alliance of Democracies that did they basically published this I guess you can say it's like a document, and basically it goes through the different factors and rating the levels of democracy across different countries in the world. And this is on the screen here is basically a chart of global perception scores of how countries see how countries are seen as a whole, right? So in the article it says Israel is now perceived more negatively. I should say it like this. The state of Israel is now perceived more negatively than any other country in the world, followed by North Korea, Afghanistan, Iran, according to the new global polling published by NERA Data as part of its 2026 democracy and country perception research, right? So this chart here is basically from this publishing here, right? And they're publishing their findings of what they have noticed in regards to how these countries are seen. So now they first listed off the countries that were seen more positively. So the first five, it says, are Canada. I'm sorry, no, Switzerland. So if you look at the top of the screen here and you just zoom in, it's kind of hard to see, but just zoom in. It says Switzerland, Canada, Japan, Sweden, and Italy, right? And it finds, and the findings are this. This is what it says about the countries that were least seen as the least positive, so negative. It says Israel at the bottom of the global country perceptions 2026 ranking. A survey of 46,667 respondents assessing how 129 countries and 3 international organizations are viewed around the world, right? So, even Iran and Russia are seen in more in a positive light. North Korea is seen as more in a positive light than the state of Israel, right? And that's very, very telling. And it says here we're surveyed 94,146 respondents across 98 countries and how citizens experience democracy in their own countries, right? So I want to read a little bit of this here. And it says the result mark another sign of the state of Israel's deepening international isolation amidst the genocide in Gaza, mass displacement of Palestinians, starvation policies, and escalating violence occupied in the West Bank. It says the state of Israel's global image has collapsed as human rights organizations, UN experts, and international courts have warned the grave violations of international law, and their own president or prime minister, whatever he's actually wanted for war crimes in the international court. I believe it's the International Court of Justice, if I'm not mistaken, right? So here it says, continuing on, the United States also suffered a dramatic collapse in global standing, right? Because the United States basically is their own, let's just say it like this. I mean, the United States is their own is the only single friend that is um, in, working with the state of Israel, right? Basically, these two countries are basically isolated from the rest of the world, right? Even though even though the United States, isn't a part of other organizations, right? They might have certain countries that have partnerships with our organizations. They're not seen, they're through these different through the years. There's been a lot of sanctions being thrown at a lot of United States, allies, such as a lot of the EU nations, for example, and a lot of that, breeds, what is it called, um, discontent, and it also fuels certain prophecies when you read up on Revelation 17 in regards to the horns, so the EU nations disliking the whore, disliking America. So so let me go to the scriptures in regards to the strong distaste, for this particular state here, right? Because we're seeing in real time, a strong distaste, for basically the state of Israel, right? And it's not just, the prophets calling it out. You basically have a lot of other people, other, YouTubers, even of their own people calling out a lot of the atrocities they're witnessing, in real time in regards to, the deleting of Palestinians, right? Um, this is Obadiah chapter 1, verse 1. And it says, "The vision of Obadiah, thus saith the Lord Yahweh concerning Edom," right? This is referring to Esau. It says, and Esau basically goes back to, when we say Esau, it goes back to descendants of the man named Esau, right? Who was the son of Isaac, right? There were two nations in thy womb, going back to Genesis, the 25th chapter. The first came out red like a hairy garment, and he was named Esau, right? And the other came out, and that was Jacob, right? And Jacob's name was changed to Israel, which begat the 12 tribes, right? So we're realizing there's two different nations coming out, and this is the nation that is not upright. These people are not upright, right? They're known as so-called white people, today, right? This is we have heard a rumor from the Lord Yahweh. An ambassador, excuse me, is sent among the heathen, and arise and let us rise up against her in battle. It says, "Behold, I have made thee small among the heathen. Thou art greatly despised," right? So, the people are very, very despised. Those people that occupy that land, they are the ones that are very despised, right? They are not seen in a negative light. There are, other countries on the international stage, even other countries, where they go, for example. So a lot of the time, these people in the land, they go to the they've gone to, different parts of Thailand, and or I think Vietnam and other places. When they travel, they when they go to certain places, they're not seen in a favorable light. They're not seen in a pleasant light. They're seen and they're met with ridicule. They're met with you know people complaining, complaints. People don't want them to be in their establishments, because the other nations are waking up in real time and it's noticing the atrocities that they're doing to the so-called Palestinians. Right? There was a president back in, I believe it was the 50s, when he said, there would never be peace in that land because the Jews left black and came back white, right? So that land really truly belongs to Israelites. Let's just get that first and foremost. But a people will come in and eventually inhabit that land, right? And ever since they went into that land, as of May 14th, 1948, during the establishment of the state of Israel, there has been a lot of wars. There's been war after war after war, right? They had, as soon as they went in, there was war with, I think they had a war with Egypt, if I'm not mistaken. So let me get that as well, because the people in the land, are not the real people. So let's go to Ezekiel. This is Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 5, and it says, "Surely thus saith the Lord Yahweh, power. Therefore saith the Lord Yahweh, power. Surely in the fire of my jealousy I have spoken against the residue of the heathen, and all Idumea, which have appointed my land into their possession, and with the joy of all their heart, with despiteful mans, and cast it off for a prey." So Idumea, when you go into it, is basically the Greek way of saying Edom, right? Esau, right? Those are the descendants of Esau, right? And now they inhabit that land that was actually given to the forefathers of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? Eventually we went into that land and we took that land, during the time. That's basically what the book of Joshua is about, right? But through process of time, through 70 AD, we were the Romans, the so-called, they destroyed the second temple, and a lot of us fled into the interiors of Africa. This is something that the Messiah, Yahushua, spoke about in Luke, the 21st chapter. Now, Arabs eventually, inhabiting that land, during like 1600s AD, so on and so forth, during the time of the creation of Islam and so forth. And then eventually now you have Esau now up in there, and proclaiming that he is the people, proclaiming that, that land belongs to him and was promised to him, and so on and so forth, right? And that's not the case. And what also proves that, these people are not the people is just that if they were truly the real people of the Lord, there would be peace on earth, right? But ever since they've been in that land, there has been nothing but war, and constant war. And other nations are seeing this. Other nations are experiencing this. Other nations, they're seeing the genocide of what's happening to the Palestinians. They're seeing the way they care for the land. They're seeing the way they care for the trees. They burn the trees. They destroy the olive trees. That's another thing too. The way they treat the so-called Palestinians. There is a case that came out in regards to the treatment of the so-called Palestinians within their prisons, and how a lot of them were being raped, men as well as women, right? They were basically using like metal rods, different kinds of rods, and sodomizing a lot of the prisoners, right? So this is what's happening, with these people. And this came out now. The Netanyahu is now threatening to basically sue the New York Times, right? So this is something that's happening in real time, and other people are discussing this, right? So I wanted to read something in the law, because I mentioned it real briefly. This is Deuteronomy 17:6, and it says, "At the mouth of two witnesses or three witnesses, shall he that is worthy of death be put to death. But at the mouth of one witness he shall not be put to death," right? So in as an example, because when you read Revelation, the 11th chapter, it describes at the mouth of two witnesses. So you have the prophets of the northern and southern kingdom calling out the atrocities and calling out these people, proclaiming to be the people that they're actually not the people. They're most likely they're just cosplaying, right? But I wanted to read this as an example of a third witness, because the Lord is putting the Spirit on a lot of their own people, as well as a lot of these regular everyday Americans as well. Because a lot of so-called Americans are realizing that a lot of their resources that are needed to actually take care of their own people are being funneled to take care of the state of Israel and and look after their welfare, rather than looking after the people of, of their own, right? So now it's causing a lot of Egyptian versus Egyptian, a lot of sedition among men, a lot of disregard for their kings and their princes, because a lot of the heads of state are basically are in support of what's going on, with regards to the atrocities that's coming out of the Holy Land, right? So, it's just an example of the Lord is basically using multiple people to expose the different atrocities of what's going on in that land, right? As a matter of fact, this is something Yahweh Shai said. Where is it? It's it Luke. This is Luke chapter 8, verse 17, and it says, "For nothing, Yahweh Shai speaking, for nothing is secret that shall not be made manifest, neither anything hid that shall not be made known and come abroad," right? So, there's a lot of information that's coming out in regards to what these people are doing, in regards to the way they treat, the so-called Palestinians, the way they treat the land, right? There's basically an inquisition and a spotlight that's being shown on them, more and more, that these people are far from holy. There's a disconnect between realizing that they are not the biblical Israel, right? People are realizing that the biblical Israel is not matching with the modern Israel. There's a disconnect of what's going on, right? There's holes in their story, basically, right? So, I just wanted to, you know, basically read this, because it really, well, let me go back to it actually. Let me see if there's a little bit more. Okay, so here it says, the U.S. decline came amid growing anger over President Donald Trump's foreign policy, including strained relations with NATO and aggressive tariffs threatening relating to Greenland, cutting aid from Ukraine, and Washington's role in the Israeli conflict with Iran. It says the survey found that the U.S. is now viewed as a major global threat behind Russia and Israel. It says here, the collapse of Israel's standing comes as global opinion has shifted sharply against the occupation state and over its assault on Gaza. It says, since October 2023, the state of Israel has deleted over 74,000 Palestinians, destroyed most of the Gaza's civilian infrastructure, and displaced nearly the entire population, imposed conditions and UN experts and genocide, and scholars have described as genocidal, right? Because they don't really care about the welfare of people. This is something. Let me get this real quick, because when you look at some of these, how you see Palestine and the rubble and the conditions a lot of them are living in, they don't actually even care about the welfare of, the how do you call that, like in society today they call it like the vulnerable sector, right? Let me get this real quick. Just give me 1 second. This is Deuteronomy 25, verse 17 in the AMP. And it says, remember what Amalek did to you along the road when you came from Egypt, and how he met you along the road and attacked all the stragglers at your rear when you were tired and weary and did not fear the Most High. Therefore, saith the Lord Yahweh, thou hast given you rest from your surrounding enemies, and in the land which the Lord hath given you for an inheritance to possess, you shall wipe out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. You must not forget, right? So, I wanted to read this because it explains they attacked the ones that are feeble, the people who were, when you think about stragglers, you think about people who don't have the capacity, the physical capacity as much as they used to, right? So people like more like your elderly, children and so on and so forth, right? Those people are examples of your vulnerable sector. Now, when you look at the way they treat a lot of when you look at the atrocities coming out from the so-called, state from Palestine, they don't care for those people. They don't regard the poor. They don't regard, the welfare of children and the elderly and so on and so forth, right? They don't actually consider these things, right? They don't actually have a certain level of fear towards the Lord, right? The only reason they just want to fulfill, and grab and do more of a land grab, so to speak. They covet fields and they take them by violence, as the scriptures say, right? They don't actually exemplify any kind of level of righteousness, right? That's why the scriptures talk about when wicked people are in authority, people mourn, right? So, but all these things, are meant to eventually come to pass, right? Because that little state is going to, drag, all these nations into, a third woe or a third war, right? And because the scriptures do say that the least of the flock, shall draw them out. It's going to draw out all these other nations into war, right? So, anyways, I wanted to just go through all this, and Lord's will, this is just quick and edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim El Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.